NBC News special report on this topic.
This is an NBC News special report. Here's Tom Yamas.
And good day. We are coming on the air with breaking news and a historic moment right here at the White House, where any minute now we expect to see President Trump greet Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy ahead of a high-stakes meeting in the Oval Office. Today's meeting follows Trump's summit with Russian leader Vladimir Putin Friday in Alaska, which Zelenskyy was not invited to. Trump and Putin signaled progress was made towards ending the war in Ukraine, but gave few details about what was discussed. And over the weekend, the president saying Ukraine might have to give up territory to end the war and suggesting he wants to go straight to a permanent peace deal instead of establishing a ceasefire first. And in a show of support for Zelenskyy, today several European leaders are in Washington. You see them right here. They have all entered the White House earlier today to meet with Zelenskyy and also meet with President Trump. And a reminder, it was just 6 months ago when President Zelenskyy was here at the White House that they had that major blow-up right in the Oval Office with President Trump, and that news conference watched around the world that really set the tone for the relationship between the Trump administration and Ukraine that has since evolved once again. Again, President Zelenskyy coming here in hopes of getting a peace deal, but what will that take? The deal's still very unclear. The details scant. I want to bring in our chief White House correspondent, Peter Alexander, who joins me here on the north lawn of the White House. Peter, just behind us, we see the color guard here. We're going to see President Zelenskyy come in his motorcade right here. Walk our viewers through what we can expect.
Well, as you can see behind us now, you have the color guard that will be greeting him. A matter of days ago, it was the military flyover, the red carpet. These are the trappings that traditionally greet a foreign dignitary when they arrive at the West Wing of the Oval Office. Over the course of the last hour or so, Tom, we've watched this parade of presidents and prime ministers, the German chancellor among them here. This is a remarkable show of European force that'll be joining Zelenskyy. Not in that initial meeting. That'll be significant. That's when Donald Trump and Zelenskyy will sit down together. And we're probably going to get right out of the gates a pretty good sense of how things are looking as the day begins. You'll remember when Trump greeted Zelenskyy back in February, it was in that initial moment where the president almost said mockingly, dismissively, he got all dressed up for this. A lot of folks said that was sort of a precursor to what we would witness behind closed doors in the Oval Office.
And we're going to be watching to see how President Zelenskyy is dressed today. There's already been some reports that he is not wearing his usual military sort of field gear, if you will, what he usually wears because his country is at war. We'll see how he's dressed here. That meeting 6 months ago, it erupted in front of the world, right, in front of the cameras. The president telling Zelenskyy you don't have the cards to be more grateful. The vice president also weighing in. It was almost sort of a tag team against Zelenskyy, who came here asking for help, hoping to get help.
And I think there's a different question he'll be asking today, which is likely, what is Vladimir Putin willing to give up? Donald Trump has talked about land swaps. The frustration for the Ukrainians, for the Ukrainian president, has been, well, you're asking us, or they're asking us to give up land. They're not giving up anything. So is there any give and take that the president is willing to push on here? You'll remember the president went into that Friday session saying he would be very, in his words, unhappy if he didn't depart with a ceasefire. We're starting to hear the motorcade as it gathers not far from us. He arrived saying he would be unhappy if there wasn't a ceasefire. He left leaning more toward Vladimir Putin's view of things, desiring a peace deal first.
We're seeing the beginning of the motorcade pull into the White House right now. We're going to pause as soon as the car passes by us. Peter, you were just commenting, there are hundreds of reporters here. You've never seen a media presence this large in both terms of President Trump. Is that fair to say?
I've covered the White House for 13 years. I've never seen this many foreign reporters here, but consider there are 7 separate foreign leaders who are here right now. You have delegations from across the planet. You have foreign leaders who had to scramble during what would normally be their August breaks to be able to come here on less than 24 hours notice.
And also the most pressing issue in Europe right now, which is a war in Ukraine that has gone on for nearly 3.5 years. We're talking about more than 1 million casualties on both sides. Hundreds of thousands of Russians have died. 60 to 100,000 Ukrainians have died. And Ukraine, a much smaller country, able to hold off Russia for 3.5 years. Russia pushed to the point where they're now having prisoners fight for them. They're having North Koreans come in, North Korean ammunition and weapons. It's been a complicated and very bloody war. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio really put it best. He says it's become a meat grinder, and Russia has more meat, and that's why they don't want to stop fighting at all.
Yeah, no doubt that's the case. But remember, for the Ukrainian people, this is their land that they say they're fighting for, which is why you've seen so many civilians be called up to join soldiers on the front lines. A lot's going to get at stake, and over the course of this visit, we'll have time to talk about what is critical here. And a lot of the conversation is going to focus on what we refer to as the Donbass, the eastern region. You talk about the Donbass. What does Donbass mean? That is the Donetsk coal region. That is famous for for its minerals, its coal, its ore, its lithium. This is a valuable resource, and notably it's also sort of the industrial powerhouse and the military powerhouse for the Ukrainian people as well.
You can see the map right here as we show our viewers. The red section, that is what Russia controls right now. The initial reports that have come out from Alaska suggest that Vladimir Putin wants even more than this. He wants lands that have not been conquered yet, lands that Ukrainians still hold, and that could be a contentious issue. On top of all of this, Ukraine cannot cede land without a countrywide referendum that is voted on. So it's incredibly complicated. This peace deal, if it is indeed a peace deal, was going to take a lot of time. And then there's the big question about how do they maintain this peace deal? Peacekeeping troops. Russia will never allow NATO troops into Ukraine. That is sort of a red line for them. But the UK and France have offered their own soldiers to be peacekeeping troops if we get to that far. But Peter, you know, a lot of the reporting, a lot of the suggestions, the speculation, we don't know what President Trump agreed to with Vladimir Putin. We still don't know. We hope to learn more later today.
And we now see some of these service members getting in position as they anticipate.
Yeah, and let's pause for a moment. Let's see if we can see President Zelenskyy come in.
That's him in that vehicle.
Yeah. So President Zelenskyy just coming in right now to the White House. We're going to put some eyes on him right now as he enters. He's going to do a quick photo op, we think, with the president. The president should greet him right outside here.
That's exactly right. He'll greet him right there in front of the West Wing. This is the tradition. So if you take that shot momentarily, you will see him. He will greet him at the door, and then likely they'll address the cameras very briefly, if without words, certainly with a wave. Let's watch.
President Trump there with Vladimir Zelenskyy. We can see the president warmly welcoming him, putting his arm around him. Reporters obviously shouting questions. The president wasn't ready to answer anything quite yet. We're watching here the body language, Peter, because we want to know how he greets President Zelenskyy. Is it the same way he greeted President Putin in Alaska just a few days ago, which was a very warm welcome? The whole world saw as President Putin walked into the Beast and was smiling and waving to reporters as they drove off to that summit. It looks like it was a warm welcome. It sounds like he may have commented something about the way he was dressed, but we'll find out later. Again, President Zelenskyy back in the White House 6 months later. We know that both these leaders have met, both at the Vatican and I think in Europe as well.
They've met twice since, you're right. And what's striking to me here is the last time Volodymyr Zelenskyy was here, he had that greeting with the president, and then he was escorted out of the White House after that meeting. This time he comes in, again, in effect, embraced by President Trump. But bigger than the body language ultimately will be what happens in those private discussions between these individuals, what Volodymyr Zelenskyy is open to, what he's willing to do. The president has already made clear where his position is on this. He says he wants a peace deal. He thinks it should include some giving away, ceding of Ukrainian land. And does it also include a NATO-like agreement where European countries agree to protect, support Ukraine in some way, but doesn't reach the bar of NATO itself? Is that enough for the Ukrainians?
We should put that graphic we have of all the Western leaders that are here, the European leaders, including the president of France, Emmanuel Macron. You can see Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister. Chancellor Merz is here from Germany as well, along with the NATO Secretary General. The Prime Minister of Italy is here. The President of Finland is here as well, and of course the President of the EU. This is such a historical moment, Peter, because you have all of these world powers here. It's why the security, I've been to the White House a few times. I've never seen it this tight. All these world powers are here. There had been some reporting that Zelenskyy had to bring backup. The White House has pushed back on that. The White House said they've worked with these European allies. They brought him in here, but this is going to be a much different meeting. The president will have to present his plan to not only Zelenskyy, but the rest of Europe.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And as has been said, the Europeans made clear to the president in the conversations before he met with Vladimir Putin, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. The real fear going into that meeting in Anchorage was that the decisions would be made behind closed doors between Presidents Trump and Putin that basically said, hey, Donald Trump agreed on behalf of Ukraine that you're giving up land. Now Ukraine gets to have a say. If the White House referred to that last session as a listening exercise, or the president, he raised the stakes, ultimately saying he'd be disappointed if there wasn't a ceasefire. This, in a way, is another listening exercise. The question is, at the end of it, does it lead to a potential trilateral meeting where Putin, Zelenskyy, and Donald Trump all come together?
That's the goal for President Trump. Speaking of Ukraine, we do want to get there and go live. Our chief foreign correspondent, Richard Engel, has been in Kharkiv, Ukraine, and all over the country for the past 2 weeks. Richard, we appreciate you being there live for us tonight. Richard, you've been speaking to Ukrainians, you've been speaking to military leaders, soldiers of Ukraine. What are you hearing from them about this meeting today?
So they're very nervous about this. They didn't like generally what they saw in Alaska, not just the protocol, the warm embrace, the red carpet, although they thought that was inappropriate, but most specifically, they don't like that now, according to numerous diplomats, Vladimir Putin has put down his price, and his price is 20% of Ukraine and more. So he currently controls 20% of this country, but he apparently wants that and new territory in exchange for stopping Russian attacks against this country. And Ukrainians don't understand this. Why should he be rewarded just because the front lines are frozen? Russian troops haven't been able to make advances against the Ukrainians, just the same way the Ukrainians have not been able to make advances against the Russians. The front lines for the last year or so have been deadlocked. It is a meat grinder. Both sides are losing a tremendous amount of men, injuries and deaths. But the Ukrainians don't understand why it is why their country that has to give up land and reward the aggressor.
Richard,
and they're very worried
Richard,
about
any
kind of security guarantees.
Richard, we thank you. Just stand by for us. We're going to go into the White House right now and listen in to see if any questions are being asked or if they say anything.
Give up anything.
Not too long.
No, very short. Very short.
Between us.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor to have the president of Ukraine with us. We've had a lot of good discussions, a lot of good talks. And I think progress is being made, very, very substantial progress in many ways. We had a good meeting, as you know, just a short while ago with the president of Russia. And I think there's a possibility that something could come out of it. And today's meeting is very important. We have, I guess, the seven very powerful leaders from Europe. And we're going to be meeting with them right after this meeting. And thank you very much for being here.
Thanks so much, Mr. President. If I can, first of all, thank you for invitation and thank you very much for your efforts, personal efforts to stop killings and stop this war. Thank you. And using this opportunity, many thanks to your wife, First Lady of the United States. She sent a letter to Putin about our children, abducted children, and my wife, First Lady of Ukraine, she gave the letter. It's not to you, to your wife.
Oh, I want it.
Yeah. So we're saying this sensitive topic. Yeah. Yes, please. And thanks to our partners and that you supported this format. That after our meeting we can have leaders who are around us, UK, France, Germany, Italy, Finland, EU, NATO. I mean, all partners around Ukraine supporting us. Thanks them and thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you very much for being here.
President Trump. Right here.
Yes, Peter.
Thank you, President Trump. So, President Zelenskyy, you say in a post on X today, Russia must end this war, which it itself started. President Trump, you say President Zelenskyy of Ukraine can end the war with Russia almost immediately if he wants to. Which is it?
Yeah, I think that's true. I think we're going to have a meeting. I think if everything works out well today, we'll have a trilat. And I think there will be a reasonable chance of ending the war when we do that.
And, is this the end of the road for American support for Ukraine? Is today's meeting deal or no deal?
I can never say that. It's never the end of the road. People are being killed, and we want to stop that. So I would not say it's the end of the road. No, I think we have a good chance of doing it. It's been almost 4 years now that a lot of people were killed last week. A lot of people last week. I mean, millions of people killed, but a lot of people last week for whatever reason. A big number, a lot of soldiers, on both sides. And I know the president, I know myself, and I believe Vladimir Putin wants to see it ended.
And as you met with Putin on Friday, today you've got President Zelensky here. As you listen to Russia and Ukraine, which side has the better cards right
I
now?
don't want to say that. I'm just here to be. Look, this isn't my war. This is Joe Biden's war. He's the one that had a lot to do with this happening, and we want to get it ended. And we want it to end good for everybody. We want it to end good. The people of Ukraine have suffered incredibly.
President Zelensky, are you prepared to keep sending Ukrainian troops to their deaths for another couple years, or are you going to agree to redraw the maps?
Thank you for your question. So, first of all, we live under each day attacks. You know that today have been a lot of attacks and a lot of wounded people, and the child was dead, small one year and a half. So we need to stop this war, to stop Russia, and we need support American and European partners, and we will do our best for this. So, and I think we show that we are strong people, and we supported the idea of the United States, personally of President Trump, to stop this war, to make a diplomatic way of finishing this war, and we are ready for trilateral, as President said. This is a good signal about trilateral. I think this is very good. Thank you.
Mr. President,
Yes. If the peace deal will be achieved, are you going to be willing to send American peacekeepers to Ukraine?
Well, we're going to work with Ukraine. We're going to work with everybody, and we're going to make sure that if there's peace, the peace is going to stay long-term. This is very long-term. We're not talking about a 2-year peace, and then we end up in this mess again. We're going to make sure that everything's good. We'll work with Russia. We're going to work with Ukraine, and we're going to make sure it works. And I think if we can get to peace, it's going to work. I have no doubt about it.
President Zelensky,
Go ahead.
Your team has talked about security guarantees. Could that involve U.S. troops? Would you roll that in the future?
We'll let you know that maybe later today. We're meeting with 7 great leaders of great countries also, and we'll be talking about that. They'll all be involved, but there'll be a lot of help. When it comes to security, there's going to be a lot of help. It's going to be good. They are first line of defense because they're there. They're Europe. But we're going to help them out also. We'll be involved. Yes.
Vladimir Putin mentioned that the war will not end without addressing the root causes of this war. Have you had an understanding what are the root causes of this war?
Well, look, the war is going to end. When it ends, I can't tell you, but the war is going to end, and this gentleman wants it to end, and Vladimir Putin wants it to end. I think the whole world is tired of it, and we're going to get it ended. It was, I've done 6 wars. I've ended 6 wars, and I thought this maybe would be the easiest one, and it's not the easiest one. It's a tough one. A lot of reasons for it. And they'll be talking about it for a long time, but they'll be talking about the others. Look, India, Pakistan, we're talking about the big places. When you look at, you just take a look at some of these wars. You go to Africa and take a look at that. Rwanda and the Congo, Republic of the Congo. That's been going on for 31 years. And so we've done a total of 6, and we really have 6, not including the fact that we obliterated, and it turned out to be a total obliteration, the nuclear, as you said, the future nuclear capability of Iran. And this one, I think we're going to get solved also. I feel confident we're going to get it solved.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can you tell us about your conversations with European leaders and what they need to see to support an end to the war?
Well, we're going to be meeting with a great representative group and 7 very powerful, very big countries, and great people, all friends of mine and friends of yours. And we're going to have some suggestions made. They want to see peace. They would like to see peace.
You said last night that
President Trump, do you think it's fair for for Ukraine and for Russia to achieve a lasting and durable peace if Ukraine cedes its territories that Russia hasn't yet conquered? Do you think it's a fair peace for Ukraine?
We're going to have a lasting peace. Just to answer the first part of your question, we're going to have a lasting peace. I hope it's going to be immediately. I hope it doesn't have to go on. And I think people of the whole world is going to be very happy when that's announced.
Thank you, Mr. President. You posted on social media, Mr. President, a very touching letter from the First Lady, and the letter was hand-delivered to President Putin, and it calls for an end to the war, essentially, because of the children and the children's future. Why did the First Lady feel that letter was necessary? Was it because she believes that Mr. Putin is the aggressor in the war? Is a similar letter being hand-delivered to President Zelenskyy?
So the First Lady felt very strongly. She's watched the same thing that you watch and that I watch. I see things that you don't get to see, and it's horrible. But when she's got a great love of children, she has a wonderful son that she loves, probably more than anybody, including me. I hate to say it, but she loves her son. She loves children, and she hates to see something like this happening. And that goes for other wars too. I mean, she sees the heartbreak, the parents, the funerals that you see on television. Always funerals. We want to see something other than funerals. No, she felt it was a beautiful letter. It was very well received by him. And she did ask me to say, you know, she would love to see this end. She would love to see it end. And she says it very openly, very proudly, and with great sorrow, because so many people have been killed.
Mr. President, last week,
Brian,
Mr. President.
go ahead,
Yes, sir. I've got a question for each of you. First of all, Mr. President Zelenskyy, you look fabulous in that suit.
I said the same thing.
Yeah, you look good.
I said the same thing.
Yeah, looks good.
I said to the one that attacked you last time. See, that was it.
I remember that.
I apologize to you. You look wonderful. No, my first question for you, President Zelenskyy.
And in the same suit. I changed your.
Maybe yours is much better than mine. Real quickly, upon peace, God willing we get peace, are you open to holding an election in your country?
Yes, of course. We are open for election, yes. We have to do safety circumstances. And a little bit, we need to work in the parliament, because during the war you can't have elections, but we can do security. We need, we need a truth, yes, everywhere, in the battlefield, in the sky, in the sea, yeah, to make possible for people to do democratic, open, legal elections.
So you say during the war you can't have elections. So let me just say 3.5 years from now. So you mean if we happen to be in a war with somebody, no more elections? Oh, that's good. I wonder what the fake
you like this idea?
No. Speaking of news, I got a question for you. This sounds insane for me even to ask this, but do you think the American media really doesn't even want a peace deal? Because they've been so critical of you every step of the way as you lead the charge for peace.
It's an amazing phenomenon. I said that if in the settlement you got Moscow, St. Petersburg, and thousands of miles around them, they would say I made a bad deal. The level of hatred and animosity is incredible. Not with all. I mean, we have great people up here. We also have terrible people up there that I think are told what to say. But, you know, in solving all of these wars, they don't even write about it. You know, I saw major wars. I saw wars that have been going on for 31, 35, and 37, and a couple of quicker ones. One that was going to go into a full-blown deal very quickly. You know what the one I'm talking about. It was a big one. But they don't even write about that. No matter what I do, no matter what, and you know, this is not anything to do with you. It's probably to your advantage in a certain way. But no matter what I do, no matter what deal I make, from my standpoint, you'll come out good. Maybe President Putin will come out good. But they'll say Trump was absolutely horrible. It's just that, and I've lived with that for a long time. I've lived with it since just before the first election. I used to get great publicity. Now I get the worst publicity anyone's ever gotten in office, but I won in a landslide, so the people understand. They're the only ones that count, ultimately. But I've also had great reporters. I've had journalists that are very good. But it's very sad when you do the right thing. As an example, they said, because of the fact that Vladimir Putin came to American soil, this was a tremendous defeat for Donald Trump. No, it was really wonderful that he did it. It was a hard thing for him to do, to be honest with you. It was the opposite of what they said, but they said it. Now, if he didn't come, they'd say that was also bad for Trump. Yeah, there's no way. And there's just a great dishonesty of the press, and I think that's why it's lost its credibility. You know, its credibility is at an all-time low. We have a thing going on right now in D.C. We went from the most unsafe place anywhere to a place that now friends are calling me up, Democrats are calling me up, and they're saying, sir, I want to thank you. My wife and I went out to dinner last night for the first time in 4 years, and Washington, D.C. is safe, and you did that in 4 days. I'll tell you it's safe. I had another friend of mine, he has a son who's a great golfer, he's on tour, and he came in fourth yesterday in the big tournament where Scotty Scheffler made the great shot, and he said his son is going to dinner in Washington, D.C. tonight. I said, would you have allowed that to happen a year ago? He said, no way, no way. He said, what you've done is incredible. And I think the people realize it. But the press says, he's a dictator, he's trying to take over. Now, all I want is security for our people. But people that haven't gone out to dinner in Washington, D.C. in 2 years are going out to dinner. And the restaurants the last 2 days were busier than they've been in a long time.
I walked around yesterday with MTG. If you can walk around with D.C. with MTG and not be attacked, this city is safe.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last week you warned of what you called severe consequences if a 30-day ceasefire or any type of ceasefire were not agreed to by Russia. Will there be severe consequences? Does that change because of
I don't think you need a ceasefire. You know, if you look at the 6 deals that I settled this year, they were all at war. I didn't do any ceasefires. And I know that it might be good to have, but I can also understand strategically why, well, you know, one country or the other wouldn't want it. You have a ceasefire and they rebuild and rebuild and rebuild, and, you know, maybe they don't want that. But if you look at the 6 deals that we made peace, you know, long-term, long-running wars, I didn't do any ceasefires. Would I like the concept. You know, I like the concept of a ceasefire for one reason, because you'd stop killing people immediately, as opposed to in 2 weeks or 1 week or whatever it takes. But we can work a deal where we're working on a peace deal while they're fighting. They have to fight. I wish they could stop. I'd like them to stop. But strategically, that could be a disadvantage for one side or the other. But all of these deals I made without even the mention of the words ceasefire.
President Zelenskyy, are you disappointed that there's no ceasefire?
Decision to offer Ukraine Article 5-like security guarantees would stop short of pushing for their full membership.
Yeah, well, we haven't done anything on that yet. If you look back and you go back long before President Putin, it was always a statement that they would never allow Ukraine into NATO. So that was a statement that was made, but we haven't discussed any of that yet. We're going to be discussing it today, but we will give them very good protection, very good security. That's part of it. And the people that are waiting for us, they are, I think they're very like-minded. They want to help out also.
Thank you, President Trump.
Are you disappointed there's no ceasefire?
The United States has already given hundreds of billions of dollars to this war effort in Ukraine.
Biden.
At best, it is a stalemate, and the killing continues. So, President Trump, how much more is the United States willing to give Ukraine? And President Zelenskyy, how much more do you want?
Well, I'll start off just by saying we're not giving anything now. We're selling weapons. This is something before, I guess the number's well over $300 billion. That was under Joe Biden, a corrupt politician, not a smart man, never was. By the way, go back 40 years. He was not a smart man 40 years ago either. But now he's in particular bad. This was done by a corrupt administration that shouldn't have been in, and frankly, if the right results of the election were given, if I were president, this war would have never taken place, and he would have been very happy. because he would have liked to have seen. I mean, they went through hell. He went through hell. This war would have never happened, and the people that were killed, a couple of million people, a lot of people with soldiers and everything else, and the people that have been displaced and forced into other areas and other countries because of what's happened, none of that would have happened. And I'm just saying that he was a horrible president, whether it was the borders or this. He was just a horrible, corrupt president.
Thank you so much. So first of all, we have possibility now to buy weapons from the United States. We are thankful for this program and this opportunity. We are thankful for Europe. They pay for this. And through NATO program, for example, Pearl and etc., we have some programs where we can have some money to finance this. And this is a part, I think, it's not a part for the war and to defend us. It also will be a part for security guarantees, to strengthen our army, to rearm Ukrainian army. This is very, very important. And it depends how much money we need to rearm. For example, the question of air defense, we spoke about it with President Trump, and I'm happy that we have now bilateral decisions and we work on it with production, American production. Nobody in Europe has so many air defense like Patriots, for example. We need it very much, and this is also about defending.
And I think the good news, we make the best military equipment in the world by far. You mentioned the Patriots. How good are they?
Systems.
We have systems. They're literally 100% foolproof, and it's really like shooting two bullets. You know, two bullets hitting each other in the air in a space like this. The chance is 100%. It's 99 to 100%. So we sell the equipment to NATO. And NATO does what, I don't know what the arrangement is that you have with, but I know that they want you to have the equipment. And we're getting the best equipment in the world, but they pay us for the equipment. Under Biden, it was just crazy what was going on. I believe the number is over 300. I think it could be $350 billion worth of equipment and money and everything else. And we've made more progress in settling this war in the last 2 months than they made in 4 years. This should have been settled a long time ago, but it should have never happened. Yeah, please.
You pushed out on social media.
Brian, go first.
You pushed out on social media about doing away with mail-in ballots and potentially electronic voting machines. Can you expand on that and how important?
Well, that's a very off-topic. Just very quickly, mail-in ballots are corrupt. Mail-in ballots, you could never have a real democracy with mail-in ballots. And we, as a Republican Party, are going to do everything possible that we get rid of mail-in ballots. We're going to start with an executive order that's being written right now by the best lawyers in the country to end mail-in ballots because they're corrupt. And you know that we're the only country in the world, I believe, I may be wrong, but just about the only country in the world that uses them, because of what's happened, massive fraud all over the place. The other thing we want change are the machines. For all of the money they spend, it's approximately 10 times more expensive than paper ballots. And paper ballots are very sophisticated with the watermark paper and everything else. We would get secure elections. We'd get much faster results. The machines, I mean, they say we're going to have the results in 2 weeks. With paper ballots, you have the results that night. Most people, almost, but most people, many countries use paper ballots. It's the most secure form. So between paper ballots, very, very important, paper ballots, and I think maybe even more important, the mail-in voting. We're going to end mail-in voting. It's a fraud. If you have mail-in vote, even Jimmy Carter with this commission, they set it up. He said the one thing about mail-in voting, you will never have an honest election if you have mail-in. And it's time that the Republicans get tough and stop it because the Democrats want it. It's the only way they can get elected. Because with men and women's sports and with transgender for everybody and open borders and all of the horrible things, and now the new thing is they love crime. They're fighting me on the fact that I've made Washington, D.C. safe. We're not going to get mugged, beaten up, or killed like all the people you've been watching get so badly hurt. I'm glad, I hate to take your time with this, but I'm glad you asked me that question. We're going to stop mail-in ballots because it's corrupt. You know, when you go to a voting booth and you do it the right way, and you go to a state that runs it properly, you go in. They even asked me. They asked me for my license plate, for identify. I said, I don't know if I have it. They said, sir, you have to have it. I was very impressed, actually. But it's very hard to cheat with mail-in voting. As you know what happens in California, it's so corrupt, where some people get 5, 6, 7 ballots delivered to them. Now, we got to stop mail-in voting, and the Republicans have to lead the charge. The Democrats want it because they have horrible policy. If you have mail-in voting, you're not going to have many Democrats get elected. That's bigger than anything having to do with redistricting, believe me. And the Republicans have to get smart. We're not going to have a country. I said for a long time in rallies, you need borders and you need free and fair elections. Those two things, otherwise you don't have. We have strong borders now. In 90 days, Mr. President, we didn't have 0 in 3 months. Not one person came in illegally into our country. In fact, even I find that hard to believe, but it's run by a little bit of a liberal group that put out the numbers, so I guess it's, but 0, 0, and 0. You go back a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 millions of people poured into our country. It was terrible. Thank you very much.
What security guarantees do you need from President Trump to be able to make a deal? Is it American troops, intelligence, equipment? What is it?
Everything. Really, it includes two parts. First, strong Ukrainian army. That's what I began to discuss with your colleagues. And it's a lot about weapon and then people and training missions and intelligence. And second, we will discuss with our partners. It depends on big countries, on the United States, on a lot of our friends.
Mr. President, are you willing to commit American troops to that NATO-like protection in order to get President Zelenskyy to a deal today?
Well, I don't know if you define it that way, but NATO-like, I mean, we have people waiting in another room right now. They're all here from Europe, biggest people in Europe, and they want to give protection. They feel very strongly about it, and we'll help them out with that. I think it's very important. I think it's very important to get the deal.
You've been involved with the peacekeeping in Ukraine since your first day in the administration. What would you say to the Ukrainian people right now who are suffering under the Russian attacks and hoping that the American people will stand with them?
Well, I know Ukrainian people. I've known many over the years. They're great people. They're smart. They're energetic. They love their country. I mean, they love their country, and we want to get this war ended. That's all I can do. I love the Ukrainian people, but I love all people. I love the Russian people. I love them all. I want to get the war stopped. Very important.
Mr. President, was there any aspect of your discussion with Vladimir Putin that left you disappointed?
Look, we just spoke to, I was just telling the president, I just spoke to President Putin indirectly, and we're going to have a phone call right after these meetings today. And we may or may not have a trilat. If we don't have a trilat, then the fighting continues. And if we do, we have a good chance. I think if we have a trilat, there's a good chance of maybe ending it. But he's expecting my call when we're finished with this meeting. Thank you very much.
We've just been listening to President Trump and President Zelenskyy inside the Oval Office. This taking a much different turn than the first meeting 6 months ago when that meeting blew up. Here, both men seem to be welcoming to each other, listening to each other, and sort of working hand in hand. This is one of the first big steps for President Trump in trying to achieve peace in Ukraine. Two major headlines to come out of this right now. The president was asked twice if he would commit to bringing U.S. troops to Ukraine as a peacekeeping force. Both times he didn't commit one way or the other, not saying he would or he would not, but he was asked that question twice. And what just happened seconds ago, it sounds like the president's timeline for this is very fast. He says right after this meeting with Volodymyr Zelenskyy and the European leaders, he's going to call President Putin. He hopes to have that trilateral meeting pretty soon, is what he said, to get the three leaders on board. It is still unclear what is part of this peace proposal, what is in the plan. Is the land going to be swapped? Is the land going to be taken for Russia? Are there going to be peacekeeping troops there? Still a lot of outstanding questions that we hope to get some answers from. Peter Alexander, our chief White House correspondent, joins me here in the North Lawn of the White House. Peter, it was pretty stunning, right? Each moment here, we're learning more and more. It sounds like the president and President Zelenskyy are in a good place for now. They were both sort of complimentary of each other, if you will.
So the first takeaway, I think, is the tone there, right? Amicable, not angry compared to last time. One thing struck me in particular, you remember J.D. Vance, the first go-around, he specifically said, calling out Zelenskyy, said, have you said thank you once? Wow. I noted that the first words out of Zelenskyy's mouth were thank you. He said it more than a dozen times in the course of those comments.
Thanking for the weapons as well.
Thanking for the weapons, thanking the United States, thanking the European allies. That was one thing that was significant. The other thing that obviously hung over this was the topic of wardrobe, right? When he came in, just for optics, and those matter to the president, who in many ways produces his own presidency. The very same reporter who last go around asked Zelenskyy why he wasn't wearing a proper suit, a gentleman by the name of Brian Glenn, who it turns out is dating MTG, as he says, Marjorie Taylor Greene. He says, I thought your suit looks pretty good here. Zelenskyy notably had a pretty quick retort here. He says, it looks like you are wearing the same suit. You'll remember Zelenskyy was a former comedian, is a comedian. He produced and created Servant to the People, a popular show which helped his rise to power, much like his television chops here in the U.S. helped Donald Trump's rise as well. There were also questions that were answered this time around compared to no questions that were answered when Vladimir Putin met with the president just recently. And then one important fact check here, as long as we're keeping our audience aware. The president says he thinks the U.S. has spent $300 to maybe $350 billion. The number is much closer to $174 billion. 5 separate packages that were passed by Congress, right, in the form of supplemental funding to Ukraine, not just to Ukraine, but some of its allies in the region. So while the president has inflated that number, it's still certainly a lot of money, but nowhere near the $300 billion he insists.
Yeah, this meeting a little bit off schedule, went 30 minutes longer probably than everyone expected, but the president, of course, answering questions, and taking a lot of questions as well. I want to bring in Keir Simmons, our chief international correspondent, who's been observing all of this from Europe right now. Keir, talk to us about some of the things you noticed. I know you and I were exchanging messages. That question, the 2 questions about American peacekeeping troops was quite interesting, because we know both the UK and the French have committed to peacekeeping troops in Russia. But this is interesting. NATO troops, Vladimir Putin would never go for. But do you think he would be okay with troops from the UK, possibly the US and France there in Ukraine?
You know, Tom, it's evening in Moscow, and you bet in the Kremlin they will have been watching that closely. They will have been disappointed, as you have just pointed out, not to have seen another blowout between President Zelenskyy and President Trump and Vice President Vance. They will be noting the way that the Ukrainians appear to be more careful in the way they approach President Trump, handing over the letter from the Ukrainian First Lady, as Peter mentioned, saying thank you multiple times. But it was also interesting, and you point to it, what wasn't said. I mean, President Trump was asked specifically an absolutely crucial question: are you willing to send U.S. peacekeepers to Ukraine? And he didn't answer that question. And why is that so important? Because the man you saw sitting there, President Zelenskyy, will have to put a huge amount on the line if he was to agree to ceding the amount of territory that appears to have come out of the proposal on Friday. Maybe even, as Richard said earlier, ceding more territory. It looks like what he is potentially going to be offered in exchange for that is a security guarantee that Russia will not invade again, will not renew its offensive. And you can see there from the map just how much land is still held by the Russians, and how that land runs down to Crimea, and so how the Russians are very unlikely to agree to negotiate over that. So if President Zelenskyy is going to get the security guarantees that he has, that he clearly needs, then President Trump is at the very least going to need to say that the United States will support the security of Ukraine. If that means boots on the ground, or if that means a promise that the US would send boots on the ground in the case of President Putin renewing his offensive, is that something that President Trump would agree to? And I think that's going to be one of the crucial questions that's going to be discussed right now as they head off for these meetings with European leaders.
Keir, stand by for us. I do want to bring in our moderator of Meet the Press, Kristen Welker. Kristen, it is clear that both the president and the first lady are putting a full court press on both Russia and Ukraine to get this peace deal. There was that striking moment there where Volodymyr Zelenskyy presented a letter to President Trump from his wife. And this, of course, in reaction to the first lady, Melania Trump, sending a letter to Putin, telling her that because of the children, they should end this war and to think about those children. Because one of the big factors here, one of the points of contention are the Ukrainian children, the Ukrainian families that are currently now in Russia-controlled parts of Ukraine. And what happens to them if there is some type of peace treaty that is signed? What happens to them if Russia keeps those land, the land that they invaded and have now conquered? What happens to all those families? Do they now have to start speaking a different language and become Russian citizens, or can they go back to Ukraine? But I am struck by the timeline that the president said, right? He came out and said, listen, right after this meeting, we're going to meet with the European leaders, and then I'm calling President Putin, and we want to get that trilateral on the calendar.
The timeline was incredibly notable, Tom, as are the other points that you just made. But first, the timeline. The fact that he's saying he's going to call President Putin at the conclusion of this day, it fits into the broader tone we've heard from this president signaling he wants to have that trilateral maybe as early as this week. A lot of skepticism about whether that can actually happen. And European allies concerned. They don't want this process to be rushed, Tom. They want to get it right. To that point about the children, it's so fascinating because the First Lady and to some extent some lawmakers, Senator Lindsey Graham, Senator Richard Blumenthal, are really trying to make those kidnapped children the focus of ending this war. In fact, Senators Graham and Blumenthal out with potential legislation that they may introduce that would label Russia a state sponsor of terrorism if those children are not returned. So really trying to open up a new front in the argument for why this war needs to end and really trying to ramp up the pressure on Russia. On that point about a security agreement, Tom, I've been talking to Ukrainian and European sources, and they say the key there is making sure that it's durable. So that means effectively that it would need to be signed into law by Congress. This is something that would need to be ratified, not just something that's a handshake, not just something that's signed by these leaders, but something that actually becomes U.S. law. So that's the type of pressure at the backdrop of this historic summit today, Tom.
All right, Kristen Welker, we thank you for that. I want to go back to Richard Engel, who's reporting live for us in Ukraine. Richard, I have two questions for you. First, your observations of what you saw and heard inside the Oval Office. But first, I want you to walk our viewers through the state of play in Ukraine right now. There are still people being killed, families being killed in Ukraine right now. And even though these peace talks are sort of at the beginning stage, the bombing has not stopped.
So this all looks very different, Tom, from here in Ukraine. President Zelenskyy talked about how families are still being killed, and he mentioned a child, a 1.5-year-old child killed today. I just returned from the apartment building where that child was killed. It's just a few minutes away from here in the city of Kharkiv. And although Russia says every single day that it only attacks military targets, that it doesn't target civilians in Ukraine, that is not true. And we saw that once again this morning. The building that you're showing right now was hit by 6 different Russian drones in quick succession. And it was a civilian apartment building full of families. We saw pets, we saw plants. There were no soldiers inside there. At least 7 people killed. And in the early morning hours, the drones started coming in. One exploded, and then about 30 seconds later, the next, and 30 seconds later, the next. So this was not an accident. This was not a rogue drone that happened to hit an apartment building. This building was targeted, and 7 people were killed, including this 1.5-year-old girl and all of her family. Her grandmother was also killed, and her 2 parents. That kind of attack, which Ukrainians consider terrorism, happens every single day here, and they are watching this. Ukrainians are watching this peace process, watching this summit, and don't understand why it is Ukraine that must surrender its territory. Why isn't more pressure being put on Vladimir Putin, not just to stop the attacks? And by the way, you can hear the air raid sirens right now if you listen closely in the background. So there are more attacks happening as we speak. So this is a daily way of life here, and many Ukrainians think that pressure must be put on Putin to not only stop the attacks like the one that killed that family and others at the apartment building a short while ago, not far from here, but the constant attacks. And also, you mentioned a very important point, Tom. You said, what happens to the people, the Ukrainians who live in those areas, this 20% of the country, or 20% plus, if Putin gets his way, that may have to be surrendered to Russia? They become Russians. We've spoken to people in those occupied areas. They live like prisoners. They are told to forget their Ukrainian identity. You can't fly the Ukrainian flag. You can't speak the Ukrainian language. It is not used officially. They are part of Russia, and as far as Russia concerns, they are only Russian, and their Ukrainian identity is perceived to be a threat. So this isn't just a bitter pill that Ukrainians have to swallow. They're facing the possibility of losing 20% of their country or more, and the people there, and having those people being indoctrinated and turned into Russian citizens. And that is something that it's not even clear President Zelenskyy could deliver on, even if he wanted to. It's not clear that the people here would accept that and would stop fighting.
Richard, we thank you for your reporting, but as we hear those air raid sirens, I want to make sure you and your team can get to your safety plan and figure out what you need to do in the coming minutes, but we thank you for being with us. Peter, I want to bring you back into this conversation. There's a lot of unknowns here, right? And I think one of the big questions for everyone, including the Ukrainians most of all, is what is going to come out of these meetings? Yeah. Will we get a sense of what the details of this deal are? Is it a land negotiation? Is it a peacekeeping negotiation? And how much of this has Vladimir Putin agreed to? And will Europe and the rest of the world believe him?
It's good questions. First, that requires there to be a deal, right? We've heard from one party, Vladimir Putin, the president spoke to with his aides a matter of days ago. What does he hear privately from Volodymyr Zelenskyy today? What are the Europeans on board with in terms of security guarantees going forward? We're obviously going to focus heavily on the potential that the president is willing to offer up U.S. troops in some form. That seems to go against much of the MAGA positions that he's taken from the very beginning. But already there's some things that they would be at odds about. You remember the president went into that meeting on Friday saying that he wanted to see a ceasefire. He wouldn't be happy if there wasn't one. Today he said, among other things, I don't think you need a ceasefire, which is a significant embrace of Vladimir Putin's view on this, where Ukraine has long said you need a ceasefire first. Had there been a ceasefire on Friday, those 14 Ukrainians who were killed in the last day or so in Ukraine would still be living right now. So that's going to be one key hump, is how do they get over that? Then what happens beyond that in terms of the security guarantees? What is the U.S. and what are the European allies willing to give? And ultimately, at the end of the day, it comes down to that land in many ways. The constitution in Ukraine, as Zelenskyy has made clear many times, doesn't let him make this decision on his own, whether it's going to cede land. The president says this thing would be over in a hurry if he were willing to do so. Can all of this happen overnight? There are a lot of lines that still have to be drawn by all parties here for this to come to a conclusion, but certainly it is tremendous progress in the fact that these conversations are happening, and it turns out they're all happening in many ways in one place with the president in attendance here at the White House.
Still a very busy day here at the White House. We're going to have the meeting that's happening right now, the bilateral between Ukraine and the U.S., President Trump and President Zelenskyy. And then those European leaders that are still here in the White House are going to meet with both presidents, and they're going to talk about the proposal for peace that we know of. There's going to be a lunch between all parties, and possibly we will hear from some of these European leaders and from President Zelenskyy and President Trump again later today about what has been hashed out. The president announcing he's going to call Vladimir Putin after the meetings here and talk about how much they've accomplished, and he hopes to have a trilateral meeting at some point pretty soon in the near future. That's going to conclude this NBC News special report. We're monitoring today's meeting at the White House, and we'll have more coverage of the president's meeting with European leaders. For now, we'll have more on our streaming network, NBC News Now. I'm Tom Yamas reporting from the White House. We thank you for watching.